do this right here. Okay.
There we go.
All right. Now we're ready.
Yes.
So, good to see you.
How are you, sir?
Awesome. How's your world?
Good.
So what are the different offices that you show up in?
I know. Well, this is my home office here. It's in the basement of an 1880s home. So as you can see, it's sort of if you pan up here, you can see the ceiling is not super. It's a little ghetto, but I manage. So
the back
I can be okay without sunlight for a while.
Wonderful, wonderful.
But yeah, I'm good. I'm good. It's I'm excited. We're kind of we're starting to turn the home stretch towards writing, right? Like I know now you're writing on yours, right? Or starting that early process. So yeah, it's exciting.
Very good.
Well, do you want me to talk for just a minute here then about like the secondary interview stuff for folks?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right, cool. So yeah, I mean, I think the biggie on this one, like, is you and I, as I've learned a lot about this process here for folks is kind of what here we are about halfway through this Get Smart phase, right? Which is really about helping you generate content ideas, like what you're going to write on, but also generate the credibility you want. Like this whole first month is to make sure that, 9 months from now, when we actually publish this thing, you've got a good book, right? You've got good content and good credibility behind it. So people are like, trust you as an author. So one part of it definitely is to go out and get interviews. And if in a best world scenario, you would go out and just do interviews until you got blue in the face, right? But given the time limits here, most of you are over the sort of course of the next, sort of 6 months, will probably do somewhere between 10 and 12 interviews that you'll use for content in your book. Now that's not enough, right? Like you want to have more content and stories. So the other way that you'll do this is what's called secondary interviews. And it's really basically a way to simulate an interview kind of by a different research process. And so what's interesting about it is there's nothing magical about it, right? It's sort of like, but what is different about it is sort of the sort of intention of how you do your research. So when people generally do research, they mostly go out looking for facts, right? Like I'm trying to find facts. It's like Wikipedia style stuff, right? I want to see like dates and facts and stuff like that. What I tell people what we're doing actually in this kind of sort of secondary interviewing is you're basically you're researching to find voice. And what I mean by that is you want to find the person's voice in ways they've said it. So if you've interviewed someone, you're basically capturing their voice from the questions and the audio and stuff like that. In this case, we're going to capture their voice from other places where they've left their voice. So the way to think about it is when you're searching, you're actually looking for things you can find in their own words. So I always like to tell this sort of story of how that works out, like as an example. So for me, one of my absolute favorite stories that I got to write for my book is about Hasan Minhaj. And Hasan Minhaj is basically he's a Daily Show correspondent. He's a really, famous comedian, and he's now got a show on Netflix. And so I like him. I love his story. I like how he broke out. He's a young guy who succeeded. And so I was able to do the 5-minute favor for him. I reached out a few things and I even found his email address and sent him some nice things. Now I know he read it because I have the read tracker on it, but he didn't respond. And so I was like, all right, that's a bummer. I want to include it. So what I actually did is I basically wrote a story in his words, but by pulling from different places. So there was a story that he told on a podcast that I loved. So I basically took the content from that and took certain quotes in that one. He also had a YouTube channel, and there's some things that he'd done in his YouTube channel. He'd done an interview that was that was posted somewhere that someone had given, and some things with social media. I took all those things and actually wrote a 1,500-word story that was really well done. It was from the way I wanted to position the story, right? It wasn't the way any of those other things did it. I did it in my position, but I pulled his words in from those places to make it read well. So the powerful part of it is it reads like a story that I wanted to tell. If I would have interviewed him, these are the questions and the ways I would have presented it, but I didn't have to go wait for him to say yes. And the postscript on this one is I actually sent it to him afterwards and got a nice note back saying this is cool. Send me the book when it comes out. So that's kind of the idea behind it, is it's just sort of a different way to do it. And I think what the exercise this week is to sort of start trying to do a couple of them because they provide really good content when you actually write. They're a way to write fast and interesting and differently. So there's nothing particularly magical about it. And going forward, you don't necessarily have to go out and say I'm going to do a secondary interview and then I'm going to write. You can actually kind of do them in tandem, right? Where you start with your secondary interview and go right into the writing part of it. But it really is just a way to sort of go out and lead yourself in trying to capture quotes, stories, insights, those things in their own words from various sources. And you'll see kind of in the workshop portion, it's like, I always start with YouTube. What have they listed? What have they done on YouTube? What interviews have they given? And oftentimes you can actually pull directly from transcripts in those sorts of ways. But find interviews that they've done, find podcasts they've been on these things, and see if you can gather things in their own words, organize those things in the way that tells a story from you, supplement it with other facts, and voila, you've got a great story. So it should read as if you had interviewed them. You just sort of make sure you cite it in ways that says, Hasan Minhaj told Gary Vee on his podcast, right? Like said, and so it's properly cited. It's never something that you like claim it's yours, but you do it in a way that kind of is clever. And so that is the power of secondary interviews, is to capture that sort of stuff.
So in citing that, follow that a little bit more. Hasan Minhaj said this on so-and-so's podcast.
Yeah.
Then twisting that into your story, or forming that into it. What does that look like as far as now what's the next statement? You basically just retell the same story he told?
Yeah, I mean, it depends, right? So for me, right, Hasan Minhaj told this story on this podcast. I'll go into the details of it. He basically told the story about how his parents really wanted him to go to law school. And he wanted to be a comedian. And so his parents are, first-generation immigrants. They really want him to go. And so what I wanted so he tells this sort of funny story about how he basically took the money that his parents wanted to spend on law school and a portion of it, and basically produced these really high quality YouTube shows that he would use. And that concept actually for him was what the Daily Show talked about, is why they signed him to be a sort of one of their correspondents. So the story, this funny story about how that one, well, what I want to tell it as is like, under my stuff, is how Hasan created something that was his. Going to law school would have basically been him kind of like borrowing credibility. So I took those sorts of stories and I told it through the perspective I want to tell. So it's sort of the same way as writing a primary story. Who's the hero? What's the takeaway that you want? And then you use all the content to sort of order and structure in a way that fits within what you want to do. So and what's nice about it, right, is you don't have to wait for anyone. You basically do these things. And so it does just take like a bunch of hunting to find those pieces. But when you go through it, you'll be surprised, like, oh, interesting. Like, I could pull this from here and I could pull this quote from here. And suddenly, like, it will be made up of multiple places, but it won't read that way. It'll read, in that way. So again, I did another one with Lin-Manuel Miranda, the guy who did Hamilton. And, I took some pieces from an interview he gave on a late night television show, and something else we did in an interview, and like these things together. And again, it doesn't read like a clunky way or a research paper, because again, we mostly write a narrative when we write sort of normally. So that's the idea here, is to sort of give people a way to kind of like tell stories that's compelling and in a way that should read, but without sort of talking to them. So you simulate the interview by listening to things that they've said elsewhere and pull what you want and then structure it in the way that you want it to be.
Perfect.
So
very helpful.
There you go. I mean, and I think, in particular, I was going to say, for someone like, for your book, and I think you're good at researching, right? Like, it's one of the things that like high level, sort of researchers do. It's not magically different. Like, you just hunt for a different type of thing, and you're looking for sort of primarily first person accounts that they've told or they've written. So their blog, their, social media, which is in their own words, books they've written, content they've done. And again, being like sort of more quotes than anything, and it becomes quite compelling in that way. So
awesome.
There you go.
That's great. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, so I'll let you go, and we can share this around, and then I'll shoot you a note too. I was going to say you and I should catch up next week to chat about your book, since I wanted to talks about. I had a couple ideas that I wanted to run by you, so I'll shoot you a note this weekend, and we'll grab some time as well. And everyone else who's watching this one, I think I'll probably touch base with you probably after week 4, when you're kind of at the point where you've gotten through this Get Smart phase. We're just about to start to write and sort of see where you're going. So like 2 weeks from now, not this week, but the following week, I'll grab time with everyone to see where they're at.
Wonderful.
Cool.
Thanks.
All right, Lincoln, I'll see you next week.
See ya.
Bye.
Okay, guys. Great to see you. Glad you're here. Looks like we have, I think we've settled in with four authors in our group. I'm going to scoot this over here so I'm not looking at you funny sideways. And so today what we want to do is a couple of hands-on activities, and I just want to give you some tools to use. And then I actually want to play another video of Eric's where he outlines what his strategy is in order to create this kind of a brief on the people that you actually research. And that just helps you capture what they tell you and what you find out about them and put it in a manageable, workable, usable solution that then you can write from. And so I think that'll be very helpful. And then we'll do a few other things today, but just want to take you through a few of these slides. Let me get that thing on full screen. Oh, I've got to share screen first. Then let's click that one. Okay, now we're sharing. Let's see. All right, so there we are. So today, a couple of things that we want to follow up with really is what we did last week, and that is about your interview and your invitations that you sent. Obviously, we were doing 5-minute favors, and with those 5-minute favors, then we then actually need to reach out to the people we did the favor for and ask them for an interview. Obviously, we can interview people that we know already. We don't necessarily have to do as many 5-minute favors and that type of thing for that to get them to respond. And they'll be good and useful. They'll be good practice. But then also the ones that you did send those 5-minute favors out, and you're doing things to connect with them and follow them on their social media posts and whatnot, then we just need to follow up and make sure that we've reached out to them and actually asked them for the interviews. But what this session's primarily designed for is to learn about the secondary interview that Eric just mentioned, and then to actually do those while we're all here together. So as we progress through here, I just wanted to share one thing with you. I thought it was really neat that I found this thing called Otter, OTTER.ai, OTTER.ai. And I was actually in a meeting this morning, and a guy told me he'd been using it. What we typically do when we do an interview is we have to transcribe it somehow, and I've used Timmy and some other tools, and those are really good, and they're low cost. They don't hardly cost anything. But this one seems to actually get the transcript better. The word sound, I mean, they didn't have as many things where you had to go in and adjust. And at the same time, it's free. I think you get 600 minutes per month free of transcribing. So it's very helpful as far as you don't have to go in and reproduce a bunch of the typing or the quotes. It's actually already done for you just after you've had your interview. And you can either interview on the phone live, and it'll be transcribing immediately when you do. It's the coolest thing. I've not seen anything like that. The other ones that I've used, you made the recording, then it had to process through, and then it worked on it a while, and then you go in and edit it, and then you have to figure out who said what. But this tool actually seems to get it right a lot more of the time, way less editing, as well. It's free for 600 minutes. I don't think that we can beat that. And even if you go over 600 minutes, you might do that initially when you're really interviewing a lot. I doubt it, but maybe. If that's the case, then it's $5 a month for a student. So very reasonable. It sounds like a tool that I'm going to use. So that was a great find for me. And I actually shared that with Eric earlier in the day. So we're all going to be using that all over the country. So let's see. So what I'd like for you to do now, and I'm going to go ahead and let you pause the video when we get done visiting about this just a minute. But go ahead and take some time to do some follow-ups with the people you've reached out to, you've done the 5-minute favors for, and let's see if we can get some more of these booked. So you've got a repertoire of interviews upcoming that will add credibility to you as well as give you content. And Angela, I was going to talk with you about this. I know you have a lot of your content already, but I think interviews will help you be more legitimate and more legitimately received by others. So if you get secondary or primary interviews with some people who actually work with underprivileged groups or underserved communities, economic development people, all those kind of things might really lend credibility to what you're doing. Obviously, you've already done some great stuff, and people know about it. But I would just bring all of that into the story as much as possible, so that you have credibility outside of just what you've done and what your story is about your experiences. So I look forward to that. I think it'll be real powerful for you as well, and Lexi and Luke as well. So it looks like we've wound up with 4 in our group. So we'll have 4 books upcoming, and Lexi was not feeling well today, but get well soon, Lexi. And then Luke is our OU student, so we have an OU connection to go with 3 OSUs. So all right, so pause it right here and do your follow-ups, and then we'll get back together in a second. So now that we're back here, let's go ahead to another exercise, and what we want to do here is look for more people that we may want to interview. And in addition to the 5-minute favors we did last week, one of the great ways to do it is to start communications with people in their LinkedIn posts. And so I've started doing that with a couple of authors that I want to connect with, and they're pretty active on social media, especially LinkedIn. And so I've been able to kind of start in the conversation with them, and hopefully that will lead to some one-on-one interviews. So that's a great tool to use to just start the conversation with those groups. Okay, so let's see what else we want to do today. Again, when you're conducting secondary surveys, I think the hardest thing for all of us, or primary surveys for that, or interviews for that matter, primary interviews or secondary interviews, the hardest thing is to pull the story out of it. And so there's some great tools to do that. When I get done with the video today, I'm going to send you 3 links to some videos that Eric steps us through different ways to actually pull the story out of the interview. And it's not easy to get someone to tell you the story behind what went on. And again, that's what I thought was fascinating with him about the secondary interviews. It's really, I think we'll really develop a skill here if we can pull the story out of the secondary interviews. So I'm anxious to learn that as well. I've done a few, but I've just got the facts and the quotes and whatnot, and I haven't really turned that into a story. So I'm just starting to do that. So that'll be something we do as we move forward. And again, as Eric mentioned, it's just a different way to research. So what I want to do right now is pause this, and I want to actually show you this research thing with a video that Eric did earlier. And I think it was really helpful as far as how to structure, not only just get your mind ready to do the interview. And this was very helpful for me. So I want to play that for you right now.
All right, as you're getting after there and starting to book more interviews, starting to get ready to have them, you're doing your research, you're preparing all these things, you know what you want to ask. One of the things that people oftentimes wonder is, well, how do I actually prepare for an interview? How do you get ready for it? So I'm going to share some information on kind of the process that I use and to help you sort of prepare for an interview. And what I would share with you a little bit is this is kind of a model on the way that journalists actually get ready, how some of the top podcast experts do this, as well as some of the things that I learned when I was interviewing related to my book. So there's some interesting things here to think about how you prepare for an interview to maximize the value and get really good stories, really good quotes, and really good things from it. So the first thing to understand is that before every interview, you have to prepare. The best interviews happen when you know something going and you know what you want to get out of it, and you're really thoughtful to be attacking this in that way. So typically, I spend about sometimes as little as 10 minutes if I know the person or I've already done some research, up to an hour researching the person. And it's this process that really helps me understand what I'm looking for, have a perspective going in, and kind of make sure that I'm attacking this from a place of knowledge and sort of real depth behind it. So first thing that I always do is I use this process to basically familiarize myself with the person. I just want to know about them. I want to go in with the perspective. I sort of want to be able to already know where they're going to go so I can anticipate things. But the most important thing in that, like why I want to be familiar, is I sort of don't want to ask them things that I could find out on my own, right? Like telling me, hey, tell me about your career path. Not that helpful because I can find it in other places. So use this as a way to dive into the places you want to know. You can say, hey, listen, I saw that you spent about 5 years at Bank of America working in their cybersecurity group. I'd really like to talk about that because I think that, I'm looking at with my book into fintech and cybersecurity. So I want to figure out how those come together. So how do they get that job? Tell me a little bit about that. You can constrain yourself and look very knowledgeable. So that's the first thing. I want to familiarize myself so that I'm focusing on the things that I want to learn versus what I could find just by a little simple Googling. The second reason that I do it is it actually helps prepare me to eventually write the story up. I create what is called a research brief. And this brief is basically pulling together a bunch of information from a lot of places and putting them into one place. So what I'm going to recommend to you is you put all of these research briefs into Quip. And you can use these as a way to keep your notes, sort of all that summary stuff in one place. But preparing a research brief is something that will help you guide the interview, make sure you have some information. I'm going to show you how to do it in a really slick and simple way. Again, I do this for every time I'm interviewing someone for the podcast or interviewing someone for a book or whatever it is. It just helps me sort of frame myself so I'm in the right place. This is one of those things that also can be a cool way to start the conversation and make sure that people know you've actually invested time. So I often start every one of these conversations with someone I'm interviewing saying, hey, it's kind of cool. I did some cyber stalking on you, so I'm excited to dig in with you into some of the things I found. As soon as they know that, they can see that you took this seriously, you're digging into it. So, saying this sort of tongue-in-cheek cyber stalking can be a good way to help it. And again, if you've done a sort of at least 10 minutes, you'll be in a good place to be able to leverage that. All right, so I want to talk to you about the concept of the research brief. And so the research brief is really a document that I try to create before every single interview, and I think you should do the same. So I'm going to give you an example of Lauren Kuntz, who's a sort of an expert in the area of chatbots. And so she's the CEO of this company called Pandora Bots, and she's been there for a while. She's sort of a leader in that. So let's assume that you wanted to interview her for your book. You're doing a book on chatbots. So this is the example of what I want to create. This is one of the pages that I do in Quip, her name, some links you can see there. You can see when she joined Twitter, her bio. You can see some facts from an interview that is sort of an FAQ that she did from HarperCollins in 2013. You can also see a little bit of the story that I found about how she got a publisher. It's a fun story I'll talk about later, about her company, a couple of relevant tweets that were out there about her, and then some specific things. I saw some things she'd attended, some things she said, some answers she'd given that were sort of helpful. She talks a little bit about the Coca-Cola revealing the AI-powered vending machine, a few things in it that I thought were kind of relevant. So this is the example of a research brief. It's like a page and a half or so, just notes. All of this comes from just doing a little bit of research, and it comes up like this. So when I'm going through my interview, I've got this in front of me, so I can be asking her things related to it. I can be pulling up things I can do it. So I set this up for each and every person. Again, it doesn't take very long. Probably on average, I spend about 30 minutes or so creating one of these, and it makes the interviews way more robust when you do it this way. So for me, again, I see this like it's 15 to 60 minutes normally, and what I'm looking for is the key facts, key quotes that are already out there, and any stories that I found to be interesting that I either want this person to tell again, I either want them to dig more on, I want to hear it in their own words, sort of things like that that are kind of interesting and relevant to me. So look at the facts, key quotes that are already out there, and stories. That's what I'm doing in this sort of 15 to 30 minute window of preparing for an interview. So why do I build this into a research brief, right? Again, you can use this as a way to guide things and structure it because number one, it's just going to help you with the interview. But more importantly, and I think this is one of the things that sort of authors fail to realize, is I use a lot of this stuff when I write their actual story. So you're going to use this content, you're going to use these quotes, you're going to use these things in addition to supplement the stuff you're already getting. So a great story in a book isn't just what they told you in the interview, it's the other things you found to do it. As Laura also told blank, you can use that stuff, supplementing it with the stuff you're getting directly. So how do you wind up finding great content? How does this stuff all work together? Well, if you're like many people, you're probably going to be saying, like, listen, I want to talk to someone from this company, or I found this person. But oftentimes we start with a place where we're looking for someone who's had a company. And so the first thing I would tell you is, if you say, listen, I want to interview someone from Pandora Bots, right, in this case, that's interesting, but don't stop there. Right? So the first thing to understand is that the company is really just a collection of people. And as we've talked about a lot, all stories really start from a central place, your hero. So look for the person, look at the org chart, find out who's the right person. That's the person you want to go to. So in this case, if I knew the company was interesting, I saw an article or something like that, great, start there, pull out the person, and then identify who is the right person. And that's going to be the person you're going to interview. You're going to think of them as a person, not the company. So we're interviewing Laura, not necessarily the company. She is at the company. She can tell us those things, but we want to really understand Laura will be our central heroine or hero in the case of this one. So basically you're going to find two sets of people. One is going to be a person that is just an individual you found interesting, and that's particularly great. Use that as you will. The other one is going to be a person that comes from a company, also an interesting angle. But no matter where this person is, you're going to start with the person. And then here's what you're going to do next. You're basically going to do whatever you do when you meet someone new. You're going to Google it. Right? So it is basically a little bit of cyber stalking. And what I find is kind of relevant in my case is I typically go through at least the first page of all the results with their name. And if they have a sort of a generic name, sometimes you'll put the company into it too, but go through all of the first page results, maybe go into the second page. What I'm looking for is kind of key things that I'm going to dig into further. Their LinkedIn page, I'm always looking for. Oftentimes I'm looking for any YouTube things, any articles from prestigious places, any kind of books they've written, any of those sorts of things. I'm looking to do them. And that's just some of the stuff that I'm going to add at the top. So as you remember here, right, with Laura, when you Google her, some of the things you see that she's been writing for TechCrunch. So great, that's something important. I see her Twitter page and her LinkedIn page. So I've got some sort of starting place to start from. That's a good place that I'm going to do from this simple Google search. The next thing that I'm going to do is I always go in and dig into their LinkedIn profile. And the reason I'm doing that is I want to basically be able to sort of understand the arc of their career before. Now, again, if you tell someone to sort of tell me about yourself, they're going to do that. But you're sort of looking for something more specific. So I always go to their LinkedIn page and kind of see if I can tell myself a story of where they went. So this is an example of how you summarize it. You say, it looks like Laura grew up here based on that one. You can see what she's been doing in it. Oftentimes in the description on LinkedIn, you can learn these things, majors they went to, where they went to school, where they worked, key things that you find out. So that's the key thing that I pull from that one, usually from LinkedIn. And oftentimes during the interview, I'll leave up LinkedIn so I can sort of have it as a guide to look back at. Next thing I do is I look for places where they've talked in their own words. So I oftentimes look for videos, or I look for specific kind of interviews where their voice is heard. So I'm always looking at YouTube to see what they've said. And here's why. Again, I look for sort of quotes in their own words. So for example, the last great movie I saw was Back to the Future for the blah, blah, blah time, right? These sorts of quotes that came from somewhere else, but can be really powerful. These are sorts of things that you can learn from a speech they've given, an interview they've done. Oftentimes when they give a, sort of a fireside chat with someone else, you can pull this stuff out. But look for sort of quotes and things like that that are in their own words that you can use as a helpful guide in this one. So this is from an interview that came somewhere else. The next thing I always look for is, do they have a blog? Do they wind up writing content on their own? Where's the words that they've done? Either a LinkedIn blog, a direct blog, Medium blog, whatever it is, I look for those pieces. And so again, I use a lot of that sort of stuff to wind up populating these sorts of things. So you can see, interesting, like here's some stuff that they wrote, maybe a recap post, here's things that they said, here's stuff that we see on it. And again, you can see this, Laura's take on, right? That's sort of some things they can do, her thoughts on. We're looking for quotable stuff that I can use that's in her own words. I want to write in her own words and have that stuff be unique at the top of my mind. So I always will look for sort of bigger things too. Have they given a big speech out there? Have they written a book? Those are the things that you can also add to. Not everyone has it, but look for those bigger things that can be really helpful too. And then lastly, do a quick look of social media. Look to see what they say on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, any of those sorts of key things. And as you see here, there's a couple interesting, sort of tweets that Laura has that you could use in the context of what you're trying to do to learn more about her. So that's basically how I do it. And what I would say is sort of interesting, and we'll talk more about this, but I say create a research brief for every person, whether you want to do a primary interview of them or a secondary interview. It's the same basic approach that you're going to be doing, because that same information will be used to create a more robust story about them. That's why I use it the same way. So it's not as if, oh gosh, you just do this if you're interviewing. Yeah, if you want to do Elon Musk, go out and do the same thing. Create a research brief for Elon that pulls out the relevant things you want. I recommend you set up a specific document for each one. Sometimes if I'm doing multiple interviews, I'll put them by date. But whatever it is, set them up as an individual document, and you'll use these as tools that you can wind up adding more stuff into. And again, remember, we're just trying to look at these as ways that you can create stories. So in your folder, just add these as something that you create and pull it up when you're ready to do your interview. I typically do them the night before or maybe the morning of, so I have a good sense behind them. And that's really the secret of kind of preparing for your interview. Yes, you'll be looking at what kind of questions, what kind of themes, but the key thing to know is how do you make sure to ask them stuff that they haven't been asked elsewhere, that kind of drills in the areas you want to know. And really by preparing in advance, you can oftentimes kind of get them to be willing to tell you stories because you can precede those things. Maybe they've told them before or something you want to hear them told in their own words. And that's the secret of preparing for an interview. That key 10 to 30 minutes in advance of time can really lead to a much better interview.
Okay, so see, yeah, I just think that research brief is a great idea. That really helped me. It's I think it'll be useful when we do our secondaries as well as our primary interviews. So in taking away that, I think it's very important too that I emphasize you go in there and you practice on Quip. I couldn't figure out how to paste and do a couple things, and so you really want to be serviceable in that. And here's why: because now that I'm working with my editor, everything that I do with the editor, she gets what my content from Quip, and so I've got to write my stories and she goes through my interviews and what I've taken away from all those and see if she can find other things that I've missed. And so that's the place where we've got to figure out, how to use it efficiently. And I'm not great at it yet by any stretch, but figure that out as far as where you're going to put things, how you're going to use it, and just get your mind focused on using Quip for this, for putting all your content. And it'll be a great place to organize as well as your editor is going to be able to find it. So that'll help. So what we want to do here the rest of the way is most of this Eric just talked about, but it's good to see it as well. So if you're taking notes or whatever, you can find the ways to do that, to do your research brief on that person. And then that'll guide you into how you go about doing the actual find the content. I think the idea, again, that Eric mentioned is that you get as many stories out of this as you can. If you find stories, obviously you're going to have quotes in that. But to me, the story that they've told someone else is going to be the way that you can craft your story and craft the direction that you're taking with your book. So these are just some more things. So the idea behind a secondary interview is that you either find a person of interest, somebody that's going to be known in your area by everybody who's in that area, or someone who works at a company that's going to be known by everyone that works in your area, or that has the same type of interest that you're taking with your book. And so just be thinking about who those big people might be, the big gets. That doesn't mean you can't use the people that you know or that you know of and finally get interviews with some of them. But the reality is you're going to need some of these real notable people, either researchers, business owners, whatever the story is that matches your book and your need. And so let's go ahead and pause this for a minute. Let's start creating your list. Who are the 3 people that you'd most like to do a secondary interview on to start with, and then what are 3 companies that you'd like to work with? So pause it right here and get those written down somewhere. Okay, so now that we're on with this, so you really do want to go in here right now with your Quip, wherever you are, if you haven't gotten it all set up the way you want. But go ahead and begin a new folder and a research brief for the people you want to work on. And so do that right now. You can pause it, and then we'll go from there. So here's the process you go through. Like we just watched on the video. You do the Google search and whatnot, and then you begin to get content for your research brief. So that's a good question. You know, the real biggies. He mentioned using the first 1.5 to 2 pages, and then see if you can, yeah, this is real important, the theme part, because obviously you want to find the person, but you want to find them in a particular context that's going to match with what you're actually looking for. And they'll probably pop up in so many places you'll be shocked, but that you've not even noticed if they're the really biggies. He went through this on the video earlier, and kind of how to go about this process right here. You'll have these slides. I just want to click through them so that you can see them if you want to look at these closer in a better view. Where she grew up, all the things about her, all the facts that are important about her, find great quotes and videos in the interviews that she's already done. And again, that Otter.ai is a way to actually transcribe some of these interviews. You can input an audio file or a video file. I haven't tried a video file yet. I'm pretty sure that you can do a video file as well. And obviously get those transcribed. To me, that helps. I'm not a great typer. I'm okay on certain things, but I'd rather work from a transcript and put it where I need it and then work from there. That helps me, but you guys are probably all great typers, because most people are. Not the old guys, but the young guys are, and the young gals. Okay, if they've got a blog, then obviously you're going to get a lot of content out of that, because they're actually writing words and telling stories and making that a little bit easier. Put it all in your research brief so that it's easy to work from. In a bit, when we start doing our stories, we'll have some forms and some formats that you can use. And what it will be is you just bring this piece in to here, and you shove this piece in here and this piece in here, and it makes it a lot more systematic, easy to manage, and it gives you some tools. We got a lot of new tools coming up for our actual writing. But you got to have this content before you can actually get to the point of writing the story. So getting that in a research brief is going to be real helpful for us all. Okay, and we saw all this stuff in the video that we just watched. So this question is always the one that we've got to ask. We've got to be finding the story in whatever we're after. That makes sense. No, we got to find the story in whatever we find. That's the better way to say it. Okay. Because the story is what we're really after. And he spoke a little bit about that, and we won't go into that in much detail because Eric's already covered a lot of that. Okay. So then how do you do it with an organizational guy? And again, I'm just going to click through these a little bit. He's gone over it, but in case you want to see these slides better, then you can pause anytime you want and write any of this down. But I think for the most part, then we've already gone through all this. And those are the same exact stories. So our homework today is to get 3 people and 3 companies. And so that's the goal. That's the goal before next week, so that you have 3 notable people, secondary interviews done, and 3 companies that you've got a person in those that you've targeted. So that's the goal for next week. And keep doing the 5-minute favors, and also trying to get the primary interviews. That's again going to be more fun. I'm going to email you the rest of how to conduct an interview as soon as we get done here this evening, and then you'll have that as well. Be sure to watch that, because those really are helpful tools when you do your interviews. And so keep working on that list of people. You're gonna come up with 3 to 6, or you're gonna come up with 6, 3 each this week, and then or that's the goal, and then we'll wind up with 10 or 12 when we get done, just for the amount of content that we'll need. Okay, I think we're about there, and I'm having fun. I hope you are. It's very exciting when you start working with your editor. My gal, she's very helpful, and she's no pressure, but at the same time, I feel an obligation to get her something to do, because she wants to help, and she's there for me. So it's really a neat thing to have. Obviously, the more content you already have, like Angela, then the easier it's going to be. But at the same time, whatever you get them, whatever you get your editor, that's what they're going to have to work with. And you'll be surprised at how much they can pull out and see things that we just haven't seen because we haven't done it as much as they have. So this is where the fun begins, really. So we'll see you next time. Have a great weekend, and enjoy the process, guys. We'll see you. Goodbye.